Today we're going to imagine two famous geniuses as possible leaders of innovation in a company. So let's start with the first one. On April 18th, 1955, Albert Einstein, who was the world's most famous scientist, passed away. The mystique around his intelligence was so great that the doctor who was performing the autopsy gave special attention to his brain. In fact, Dr. Thomas Harvey removed Einstein's brain. He weighed it, photographed it, dissected it, and preserved the pieces. And these pieces have traveled around the world to be studied by numerous scientists who are all eager to find a connection between Einstein's unique intelligence and the physical structure of his brain. But there was another genius contemporary to Einstein who received very little scientific scrutiny after his death. This was Pablo Picasso, who was born just 2 years after Einstein. He changed the art world with Cubism and its influence on all modern art. But when Picasso died, no one performed an autopsy on his brain. It wasn't discussed or studied to determine what made him such an artistic genius. So why not? He was equally influential and brilliant in his own field. Picasso's genius wasn't scientific, so he didn't capture the attention of the scientific world in the same way that Einstein did. But Picasso's artistic genius may be just as important to the effective operation of R&D departments or innovation efforts as Einstein's scientific genius could be. Howard Gardner believes that there are multiple forms of intelligence and that genius in any one of these forms is a genuine form of being brilliant in a specific aspect of being human. So he suggests multiple forms as these categories. He says there's a logical or mathematical intelligence, which is scientific and technical talent like Einstein had. There's a verbal linguistic intelligence, which is the ability to use words and language effectively. Arguably, Abraham Lincoln would be an example of that. There's interpersonal intelligence, the ability to interact effectively with people and teams. Bill Clinton is famously known for being able to do this. There's intrapersonal intelligence, which is self-reflective and self-understanding. This would be people like Buddha and Gandhi. There's a visual spatial intelligence, which is imaginative and artistic, which is Picasso. There's a bodily kinesthetic intelligence, which is physical talent and dexterity, such as the gymnast Simone Biles. There's a musical intelligence, the ability to create unique and beautiful and moving music, such as Bach and Beethoven. And there's a naturalistic intelligence, an ability to manage and relate to the natural world in the way that Jane Goodall does. And there's probably an organizational intelligence, knowing how to put together a new kind of company, as Jeff Bezos has done. We all have some mix of all of these intelligences, and while most of us balance several of them, the exceptional brain can express itself through math and science, as Einstein did, but it may also excel in language or relationships or spiritual understanding, art and physical abilities. We tend to recognize most readily those geniuses who share our own intelligences. In R&D departments, we respect the logical mathematical intelligence, but we may miss the value of other forms. Is there a place for all those other forms of intelligence in an R&D laboratory or in an innovation unit of a company? So how would an R&D department built by Picasso differ from one that was built by Einstein, perhaps? So let's look at both of these. Einstein's R&D department would almost certainly be staffed with the smartest scientists and mathematicians. He would bring in colleagues like John von Neumann and Stanislaw Ulam and Werner von Braun, all of whom showed their expertise in creating the atomic bomb and exploring new theories of physics. They would be at the top of his recruitment list. Such a brilliant group would seem to be the natural choice for an R&D department. Surely there would be no theoretical or technical problem that they couldn't tackle. Einstein might also recognize the need for interpersonal skills in his managers, who could oversee and organize the scientists. His experience at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study showed him that scientists could be very contentious and unwilling or unable to compromise without effective intermediation. So with this in mind, Einstein might have turned to someone like Robert Oppenheimer, who was the master at dealing with these kinds of personnel problems on the Manhattan Project. And with these two categories of skills accounted for, the great Einstein may have closed the door to his department and set off to create new products for the likes of General Electric or General Motors, Alcoa, IBM, the big companies of his time. But would such a department be successful from a business perspective? Would all of this logical intelligence, guided by talented management, be able to create products that were both functionally valuable and aesthetically attractive to customers? So let's look at Picasso's R&D department. They would likely be composed primarily of visual spatial geniuses like himself. He would probably recruit other artists, perhaps the masters who started him down his own path towards Cubism, people like Edouard Manet or Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, and Edgar Degas would be the leading thinkers and creators in Picasso's department. Such a unique creative group would be able to outdesign any competitor. They may not create advances in technology, but they would significantly improve the visual and functional style of everything they touched. Picasso was a sculptor as well as a painter, and as a result, he may also recognize the role of bodily kinesthetic intelligence in product testing and usability. And perhaps he would seek out some of these geniuses for a department that would be able to suggest functional modifications to the design team. This sounds very similar to companies like Apple, Google, and Hyundai, who emphasize the design features of their products. Most likely, neither of these geniuses and their associated teams alone would create the optimal R&D department. In either case, the resulting structure would be lopsided, heavy in the area of the founder's personal genius, and while Einstein and Picasso represent the extreme success of one unique form of intelligence, their stories in isolation would lead to a neglect of the benefits of the other forms of intelligence. The truly successful R&D department might use all 8 of the intelligences listed. Executives and market-facing staff members who promote new products and services and attract attention to them need verbal linguistic genius. Interpersonal geniuses can handle internal personnel and organizational issues, while intrapersonal geniuses identify the psychological needs of customers. The visual spatial geniuses would create the look and shape of a product, making it sexy and attractive. Bodily kinesthetic geniuses would test product functionality and ergonomic fit. And the logical mathematical geniuses would create new technology that is the basis of completely new products. Something like an Einstein versus Picasso contest seems to be playing out in a number of industries, but most notably in the battle between Apple and Microsoft. Each company creates the operating system for a major proportion of the world's computers. Both have chosen to pursue the creation of hardware as well. Apple in digital music, like their iPod, the iPad, and the iPhone, and Microsoft in computers and games, like the Xbox and the Surface. But while Microsoft has made huge investments in R&D, Apple has captured a much bigger market with its R&D budget, just under a quarter of the size of Microsoft's. In this case, it seems that Picasso's team has created a product with a much larger market impact, something that is ubiquitous, that offers significant visual spatial advantages over the competitors. Meanwhile, the Einstein team has focused on overpowering competitors with a product that is impressive to hardcore technologists, but not terribly relevant to the larger proportion of society. Is this because Einstein cannot see that mass consumers need a ubiquitous product that is perhaps less feature-heavy than the Xbox 360, while Picasso is not attracted to the raw power of computer technology when there are such obvious opportunities in design? Is it easier to be an Einstein or a Picasso? Does Picasso's R&D come from a brain that is somehow more unique than Einstein's brain? When we create R&D teams, are we putting too much emphasis on that which is most easily measured and too little on less easily recognized forms of genius, which may have greater impact? Does the culture inside of a company allow an R&D team to choose to be Einsteinian or Picasso-esque, or a combination of the two? Or does corporate culture dictate which pattern has to be used?